Why was everyone so certain she didn't belong? The dust of the Cunard Valley clung to her boots as if the earth itself meant to drag her down, to remind her she was an intruder in a world of men and weapons. It coated her throat, her teeth, even the threads of her clothes, but it was the weight of their eyes that pressed hardest. In the command tent, she stood in the heat of fluorescent light, a ghost among rangers who lived and breathed the sharp edge of war. She didn't speak, not at first. Silence was its own weapon. Colonel Marcus Thorne, a man who carried authority like a shield, glared at her from across the folding map table. His voice was gravel, honed sharp from years of shouting orders that were obeyed without question. "Vance, is it?" He said her name like he'd already dismissed it. His gaze flicked over her, civilian trekking gear, worn boots, the lines at the corners of her eyes, and landed on her face with the finality of a gavel. Her file was thin. He made sure to point it out. Pentagon liaison, strategic advisor, observer. A woman sent to tally up their efficiency like an accountant, not to bleed beside them. The contempt in his tone was measured, deliberate. He wanted her to know she was unwelcome. She nodded once, her voice level. "Yes, sir." The others in the tent didn't hide their skepticism. A captain and a lieutenant, too young to know the weight of their own arrogance, exchanged glances. Their eyes lingered on her gray hair, her quiet posture, her soft civilian clothes. To them she was nothing but baggage, fragile, irrelevant, out of place. Inside she felt the familiar chill. Not anger, not fear, something colder. The quiet acceptance of being underestimated. She had worn that dismissal like armor before in other places, in other lifetimes. She knew what it cost to prove the truth and what it cost to keep it hidden. "I'll stay out of your way," she said, because that's what they wanted to hear. Thorne leaned forward, his hands flattening the map, and spoke like a judge sealing a verdict. "Find a cot in the transient billets. Don't get in the way of the men doing actual work." His voice was final. His attention already moved on. She was dismissed without ceremony. She walked out into the blinding Afghan sun, the grit of the valley swirling like ash around her. The fire team she passed smirked openly, nudging one another as she made her way to the far end of the base, to the tents set aside for outsiders. They saw someone soft, someone misplaced, someone safe to laugh at. She let them. Dismissal was a language she understood fluently. It was the silence before a storm. For 2 days she was a shadow drifting along the perimeter of Fob Bastion. She rose with the sun, walked in its glare, returned under its fatting light. Her movements were deliberate, economical, like a ritual only she understood. Soldiers saw her circling the wire and assumed she was restless, fighting boredom with a stroll. A Pentagon woman getting her steps in. But Sergeant Omar Hassan noticed. From his post near the mortar pit he watched her pause at the western tower, eyes tilted toward the peaks that knifed the horizon. She didn't squint at the view. She studied the wind. He saw her hold up her hand, fingers reading the air, saw her crouch to let the dust sift through her palm, watching how it spiraled. He recognized the trick. A sniper's trick. One he had taught to his own spotters. It unsettled him. Who exactly was she? Her mind was a storm of calculations she didn't write down. The valley was chaos, a labyrinth of winds twisting between mountains, heat shimmering off stone, cold drafts rolling from snow-tipped ridges. She mapped it all silently. The morning mirage that warped the air between 8 and 11. The invisible shear that split the valley at 1,500 yards. The way barometric pressure bent the path of a bullet without mercy. The men thought she was idling. In truth, she was sighting in the valley itself, not with a rifle, not yet, with memory, instinct, and scars older than the dust that covered her boots. Her stillness unnerved even her. It had been years since she let her mind fall into the mathematics of long shots. 2 years since she'd stepped back into this silence, the kind that comes when everything depends on your next breath. She had tried to leave it behind. She had promised herself she had left it behind. But here, on this outpost tucked between unforgiving ridges, the past whispered its way back into her hands. The whisper turned to a roar the moment the radio crackled. The target was found not by men but by machine. A reconnaissance drone circling at 20,000 feet painted a grainy picture on the tent's monitor, a jagged ridge known as the Dragon's Tooth, and upon it an enemy communications relay, Daisy, chained to an optical sensor. Solar-powered, hidden in the rocks, positioned with genius precision. A single eye watching everything. Thorne's jaw tightened. Range 2,800 yards, the intelligence officer answered. His voice faltered as if the number itself was absurd. The silence that followed was heavy. Shots under 2,000 were difficult. At 2,500, a sniper's skill turned into faith. At 28, pushing 3,000 in the teeth of the valley's shifting winds, it was not just difficult, it was impossible. And yet the relay was live. Every patrol, every rotation, every weak point, they were being watched, calculated, recorded. It was not just a machine on a mountain. It was the promise of an ambush, a threat not tomorrow but now. Options collapsed one by one. An air strike risked missing. A ground team would die before they reached it. A sniper shot was the only choice, and Hassan's team was the only one that could try. She heard the call go out. She saw them jog toward Watchtower 4, rifle slung, spotter close behind. She didn't need to be told what was happening. She knew. She had lived this scene before in other valleys under other names. At the base of the tower, she stopped. The wind touched her cheek, soft here at ground level but crueler up there where the shot would fly. She tilted her head, listening. The mountains always spoke if you knew their language. Above, the rifle cracked. A pause, a report. Impact was low and right. A second shot, another pause, no joy. They were walking it in, but the wind was laughing at them. Inside the tent, Thorne barked, furious, pressing his best men harder, demanding the impossible. Hassan's calm voice frayed at the edges. 6 rounds gone. No progress. They were guessing now, burning through time, through hope, through what little faith the colonel still had in them. She closed her eyes, saw it all play out in her mind. The bullet leaving the barrel, fighting 3 different winds stacked like invisible rivers, losing its fight to gravity before ever reaching the ridge. They were chasing a ghost. And the ghost would win. The relay was not just hardware. It was a promise of blood. That information would be used to cut into the lives of men on patrol. These men, even the ones who laughed at her. They didn't know it yet, but their survival was already tied to her silence. She had promised to stay out of the way. She had meant it. She had wanted it. But some promises break under the weight of necessity. And so she walked. Her boots pressed deeper into the dirt with every step toward the ladder of Watchtower 4. Rangers shifted uneasily, their confusion written across their faces. Specialist Tanaka, the one who had mocked her most, stepped forward to block her. "Ma'am, this is restricted." She didn't break stride. Her eyes met his and something flickered there, so sharp, so certain, that he moved aside without another word. On the platform above, Hassan and Davies looked up from their rifle, their frustration carved into sweat and silence. They saw her, and disbelief turned their expressions rigid. Hassan tried to shoo her off. Respectful but firm. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you can't be up here." She ignored him. Her gaze went not to the men, nor the rifle, but out across the valley to that jagged ridge where the machine still watched. The noise, the tension, the smirks, the anger, all of it faded. There was only the target, only the math. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, almost gentle. "Let me try." What kind of audacity was this? A woman they thought was just passing through, standing in the sweat-soaked tension of the sniper's perch, asking for the most impossible shot of the war. Hassan stared at her, his lips parted but no words came. For a brief moment he was caught not by her request but by the look in her eyes. The calm was absolute, the kind of calm no one could fake. It was not arrogance, it was inevitability. The radio crackled, Colonel Thorne's voice cutting through the static. "Hassan, status." Hassan's throat felt dry. He wanted to tell the colonel this was madness. He wanted to shove her back down the ladder and pretend she had never spoken, but something in him hesitated. Pride was a small thing compared to the lives downrange. He swallowed hard. "Sir," Hassan said, his voice tight, "we have an advisor up here. She wants to attempt the shot." The silence on the net was thunderous. "Is this a joke, Sergeant?" Hassan glanced at her again, that unwavering focus, that stillness. He shook his head, though the colonel couldn't see it. "No, sir, it is not." Another pause, long enough for every man listening on the fob to hold his breath. Then Thorne's voice returned, dripping with anger and resignation. "Fine, she has one shot. One. Then get her out of there." Permission, fragile, begrudging. But permission all the same. The atmosphere on the platform shifted. The mockery died. What remained was disbelief laced with morbid anticipation. They were about to watch a civilian bureaucrat humiliate herself, or do something they would never forget. Hassan stepped back from the rifle, stiff, reluctant. "It's all yours, ma'am." There was still a sting of mockery in his tone, but she didn't acknowledge it. She moved with the efficiency of someone who didn't need to prove anything to the people watching. Every motion was spare, precise. She didn't grab the rifle right away. She reached for the spotter's scope, swung it left of the target, and locked onto a sun-bleached slab of rock. Davies frowned, ready to argue. "Ma'am, the target is." "Quiet." Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the authority of someone who had spoken those words in life-and-death moments and been obeyed. Davies shut his mouth. She studied the heat shimmer for a full minute, reading it like a page in a book. The waves told her the truth, 3 distinct currents. The valley wasn't a single problem to solve. It was 3 stacked puzzles, each moving differently, each conspiring to twist a bullet away from its destiny. They hadn't seen it, they couldn't, but she could. When she finally set down the scope and reached for the rifle, her movements were reverent. She lay flat on the dusty platform, the wood hot beneath her, the M2010 cradled into her shoulder. Her cheek settled on the stock like it was an old memory. "What's the range?" she asked, voice muffled by the cheek rest. Davies rattled it off. 2,840 yards, temperature 88, humidity 15, pressure 29.89 and falling. She processed it all silently. She didn't reach for their ballistic calculator. She didn't need to. The math lived inside her. Years of training, decades of experience. 1,000 shots, each carrying lessons burned into her bones. "Elevation 38.5 mils," she said, calm, certain. Davies blinked. "Ma'am, that's insane. That'll overshoot the whole mountain." Her fingers twisted the elevation turret herself, precise clicks echoing in the silence. Then she adjusted windage. 42 mils left. Hassan couldn't hold back. "You're holding into the wind. The main current is left to right. You should be." "Yes," she interrupted softly, "but the gorge shear will shove the round right. And above that there's a weaker stream pulling left. I'm not holding for one wind. I'm holding for all 3. They stared. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't hopping. She was solving. Down below, the rangers had gone silent. Curiosity curdled into awe, though none of them wanted to admit it. They had mocked her. Now they watched her become something else entirely. Her world shrank to the crosshairs. The relay shimmered in the mirage, taunting her, daring her. She ignored it. She slowed her breathing, long and measured. Inhale, hold, exhale. She slowed her own pulse, waiting for the stillness between beats, the moment where everything, heart, body, mind, aligned. Her finger found the trigger, pressure steady, not a squeeze, not a yank, just pressure. And then the rifle spoke. The crack rolled through the valley, echoing off the ridges. The rifle bucked, the casing clinked across the platform. Through the scope, she tracked the faint, corkscrewing vapor trail, a thread of white carving across 2 miles of invisible chaos. 1 second, 2, 3. A puff of dust, plastic shattered. The antenna feed horn snapped in half. The gasp that went through the fob was collective, involuntary. Davies whispered, "Hit, dear God, it's a hit." But she wasn't done. She worked the bolt smooth and fast, chambering another round. "It's disabled," she murmured, "but not blind." The optics were still alive, watching, recording. She exhaled, settled again, same hold, same breath. Only now her target was smaller than any sane sniper would attempt, the lens of the camera itself, a silver-dollar circle of glass 3,000 yards away. The rifle cracked again. The round's flight felt eternal. Every man on the base seemed to stop breathing. Then the lens starred, cracked, shattered. The unit went dark. Silence fell profound, complete. Even the wind seemed to pause. In the command tent, Thorne's voice was a ghost on the radio. "Status." Hassan swallowed hard. "Sir, target destroyed, 2 rounds, 2 hits." The colonel didn't respond right away. Because for the first time, Marcus Thorne, the man who carved himself from stone and demanded the impossible, was rethinking the limits of reality. Up on the tower, she rolled onto her knees, set the rifle aside. She didn't bask in the stunned silence around her. She didn't gloat, she simply looked out at the valley. Calm, distant, unreadable. To her, it wasn't about pride. It was about solving the problem. But to everyone else, it was revelation. Because in 2 shots, the quiet, gray-haired Pentagon visitor had turned into something they couldn't explain. Something they couldn't dismiss. Something they would never forget. What had just happened? Colonel Marcus Thorne sat frozen in his chair, his fist still pressed to the table as if anger could explain away what he just heard. 2 rounds, 2 hits, at a distance that had mocked his best men, at a range where physics itself seemed to conspire against success. He stared at the monitor, the relay now silent and broken. The young lieutenant was babbling about wind shear, trajectory, probability curves, but Thorne barely heard him. All he could hear was Hassan's voice repeating in his head, 2 rounds, 2 hits. It wasn't possible, and yet it had just happened. His eyes shifted to the folder sitting in the corner of his desk, the thin manila file he had dismissed hours earlier. He snatched it up, tore it open. The first page was the sanitized version he already knew, Pentagon Advisor, Observer, Liaison. But tucked behind it, sealed in crimson, was an envelope he hadn't bothered to open. He ripped it now, his hands suddenly clumsy. A single sheet slid free. Most of it was blacked out, names, missions, locations swallowed by heavy ink. But what was left visible was enough to make his breath catch. Rank, Master Sergeant retired. Specialty, Sniper. Advanced Tactical Reconnaissance. Call sign, Spectre. Thorne froze. It wasn't just a name. It was a myth. A whisper passed from one classified briefing to another, always unconfirmed, always dismissed as exaggeration. The sniper who made the impossible shots. The operator who appeared where no one should have been, who solved problems no one else could. There were stories. A general taken mid-flight from a moving helicopter, a mile away. A fuel depot destroyed with a single bullet through a pressure valve. Kills at distances the manuals said were fantasy. Spectre wasn't supposed to be real. And yet she had been standing in his tent that morning, quiet, dismissed. His stomach tightened, shame curdling into something worse. He had shoved aside a Stradivarius and told it not to get in the way of the marching band. He had dismissed a legend. He pressed the radio to his lips. "Sergeant Hassan." "Sir." "My compliments to Miss Vance. Tell her I'd like to see her in my command tent, at her convenience." The words burned his tongue. He hadn't used "at her convenience" with anyone below the rank of general in years, but it was the only phrase that fit. Anything less would have been an insult. Outside, the air shifted. The rangers who had gathered at the base of Watchtower 4 were silent now. The casual smirks, the folded arms, the easy postures, they were gone. They stood straight, shoulders squared, gazes fixed on the platform where she still lingered, looking out at the mountains. Not a woman, not a visitor, a force of nature. The revelation rippled through the company. What they had thought was weakness was now revealed as restraint. What they had laughed at was now proof of a kind they couldn't touch, couldn't argue, couldn't diminish. Respect wasn't asked for, it was commanded in silence. Up in the tower, Ara Vance, Spectre, cleaned the rifle she had borrowed as though it belonged to her. Every speck of dust, every trace of carbon wiped away. Her hands moved with reverence, not pride. It wasn't hers, but a weapon that solved its purpose deserved care. When she was done, she handed it back to the armorer without a word. He took it in silence, as if receiving something sacred. Stepping out into the cooling air of late afternoon, she found Thorn waiting for her. Not in his tent, not behind the armor of his rank. He had walked halfway across the compound to meet her, alone. Every pair of eyes on the fob followed. He looked older than he had that morning, as though arrogance had been sandblasted away by the day. He stopped a few feet from her, posture rigid, hands clasped behind his back in the formality of respect. "Miss Vance," he began. Then he corrected himself, "Master Sergeant." The title was heavy. It had been 2 years since she had heard it, and hearing it now cracked something inside her chest. A name she had shed, a life she had buried. She gave a slight nod, the smallest acknowledgement. "I reviewed your file," Thorne said. He didn't apologize. Men like him didn't waste breath on apologies, they weren't enough. Instead, he offered something rarer, recognition. That was the finest marksmanship I've ever seen, or heard of. His eyes met hers, and for the first time the ice in them melted into respect. "We are honored to have you here." He extended his hand. It wasn't the cursory grip of a superior. It was the handshake of one warrior to another, firm, solid, brief, but loud in its meaning. Behind him, Sergeant Hassan approached. He stopped at a careful distance, flanked by Davies and Specialist Tanaka, the 3 men who had stood closest to her, who had seen the impossible up close. Hassan didn't speak. He didn't need to. He clicked his heels together and gave her a slow nod, formal, deliberate, more than a greeting, a salute, a gesture of recognition deeper than words. Davies followed. Then Tanaka, his young face still etched with humility, his earlier mockery burned away. She returned the nod, her gaze steady. No triumph, no pride, only acknowledgement. Respect when earned didn't need noise. The sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and violet. The crisis was over. The relay was gone. The fob returned to its rhythm, but something had shifted in its bones. No one would forget what they had seen. She didn't join them for the evening meal. Instead, she drifted to the northern berm, sitting cross-legged on the packed dirt, watching the valley fade into shadow. The wind that had once fought her now brushed cool across her face. From her pocket she pulled a single brass casing, one of the 2 spent rounds. It gleamed faintly in the dying light, still warm with memory. To the Rangers it was just scrap metal. To her it was proof, not of victory, not of legend, but of identity, a part of herself she had tried to bury, called back into the open by necessity. Her past was heavy. She had carried it like armor, like a burden, like a secret. And today the armor had cracked. The light had bled through. She sat there in silence, holding the brass. Until footsteps approached. Specialist Tanaka, awkward and young, stopped a few feet away. In his hands, 2 steaming mugs. He shifted on his boots like he wanted to vanish. "Ma'am," he caught himself. "Master Sergeant," his voice was quiet, "I brought you some tea." He offered the mug like an offering. She took it, her fingers brushing his, warmth spreading into her chest. "Thank you, Specialist." He stood there unsure. Finally he said, What you did today, we've never seen anything like it. You did your job, she said simply. The wind was the problem. He nodded, though the answer was too small for what he had witnessed. He lingered another moment, as if searching for words big enough to contain it. He didn't find them. "Good night, ma'am," he said at last, retreating into the dark. She sipped the tea, eyes fixed on the silhouette of the dragon's tooth against the stars. She had arrived invisible, dismissed, forgotten. She remained quiet, but now when they looked at her, they saw. Dignity had no need for speeches. It acted. And today it had spoken from 3,000 yards. Why had she ever thought she could leave it behind? The valley was quiet that night, the stars sharp as shards of glass against the Afghan sky. The wind carried the chill of snow peaks down into the basin, tugging at the canvas of the fob, rattling loose tin, whispering through the wire. She sat on the berm, brass casing turning in her palm, tea cooling at her side. Her body was here, but her mind was slipping backward through years she had tried to lock away. The name Spectre was not just a call sign, it was a scar. She had earned it not in triumph but in silence, in missions that never reached paper, in decisions that never reached daylight. The world knew the myths, the stories traded between operators over beers and bruises. But she knew the truth. Every impossible shot had a face. Every clean strike had a ripple of consequence that no one else carried. The general taken from a moving helicopter. What the whispers didn't say was the boy soldier who had been standing too close, collateral in the impossible calculation. The depot she had lit with a single round, it had fed more than an army. It had fed a village, too. The myths never told those parts. The myth was clean. Her memory was not. That was why she had walked away. 2 years ago she had laid down the rifle, shed the title, buried the ghost. And yet here she was, brass casing in hand, tea in her chest, their stares heavy on her back even from a distance. They saw legend. She felt the weight of ghosts. She thought of Thorne's eyes that afternoon, the respect in them hard-earned, undeniable. She thought of Hassan's nod, Davy's awe, Tanaka's awkward reverence. She had wanted their dismissal, it had given her freedom. But now they looked at her differently. And that was its own kind of prison. Respect meant expectation. Expectation meant weight. And weight was what she had come here to escape. She closed her fist around the brass, harder than she meant to. The sharp rim cut into her palm. She welcomed the pain. It was real. It grounded her. Footsteps approached. She knew the sound before the figure appeared. Hassan. He stopped a few paces back, not intruding, just waiting. His respect was quiet, careful. She didn't look at him right away. "Hell of a shot," he said at last. His tone wasn't boastful, wasn't even admiring, just simple truth. She didn't answer. He shifted his weight. "You know, I trained Davies myself, best spotter I've ever had. He's been with me 3 tours, and we couldn't even touch that relay." Still she didn't answer. Finally, he asked the question that had been gnawing at him since the shot. "Who are you, really?" She turned then slowly, her eyes finding his in the dim light. The kind of look that doesn't blink, doesn't shift, doesn't dodge. It was not angry, just steady. "You don't want that answer, Sergeant." He held her gaze, but the longer it stretched, the more he understood. He nodded once, like a man who had stepped too close to the edge of something vast. "Fair enough," he said quietly. He turned, leaving her to the silence. She exhaled, long and slow. Relief tangled with regret. The truth wasn't just dangerous. It was corrosive. It would eat at him if she gave it voice. Better it stayed buried. The next morning, the air in the fob was different. Not louder, not softer, just changed. Men who had laughed at her now straightened when she passed. The casual smirks were gone, replaced by nods, by hushed glances, by silence. Respect hung in the air like smoke after a fire. She hated it. Not because she didn't value it, but because she knew what came with it. Respect meant they would look to her again. They would expect her to solve what others could not. and solving those problems always left scars. At breakfast, she ate alone, a tray of eggs and flatbread tasteless in her mouth. A group of rangers nearby tried to act casual, but their eyes flicked toward her over and over. She felt it like heat. Tanaka, seated among them, tried not to look at all, his respect too fresh, his shame too raw. She finished quickly and left, slipping into the rhythm of her perimeter walks again. Dawn light broke sharp over the ridges, the valley shifting from gray to gold. She traced the wire, boots crunching gravel, fingers grazing chain link. It wasn't idleness. It was habit, always watching, always measuring, always ready for the next problem. But readiness was a sickness too. Even when she tried to leave it behind, it followed. She couldn't stop scanning the terrain, couldn't stop cataloging wind shifts, couldn't stop running calculations she didn't need. She had been built for this, and she had spent 2 years trying to unbuild herself. As she neared the western tower, Hassan's voice drifted down from above, calling corrections to his spotter as they ran a drill. She stopped, tilted her head, listening. His cadence was steady, professional, the sound of a soldier teaching another to carry the weight. Her chest tightened. She had trained men once, dozens more, faces she could still see if she closed her eyes, men who had survived because of what she taught them, men who hadn't. She walked on, not looking back. By mid-afternoon, the colonel summoned her. This time when she entered the command tent, the atmosphere was different. No smirks, no dismissal. Thorn rose as she stepped inside, not a dramatic gesture, just enough to show what had changed. "Master Sergeant," he said, voice steady, "we need to talk." She stood across from him at the map table, hands loose at her sides. She didn't sit. "I read your file," he continued, "or what they let me see. The name Spectre." He shook his head, half in disbelief, half in respect. "I won't insult you by pretending I know the whole story, but I know enough now to understand what I dismissed." Her face didn't change. She let him speak. "I'll be honest," he said. "When I saw you in here that first day, I thought you were a burden, extra weight, and I was wrong." His jaw tightened. "We don't get second chances in this line of work, but you gave me one yesterday. You gave all of us one." For a long moment, silence stretched. Finally, she said, "I didn't do it for you." He nodded slowly. "No, you did it because that's who you are." Her chest ached at the words, because that was exactly the truth she had been running from. He studied her a moment longer, then gestured at the map. "We're not done here. The enemy won't stop with one relay. They'll adapt. They'll try again. And when they do, I'd be a fool not to ask for your insight." She stared at the map. Ridge lines, valleys, outposts, lines of fire and sight and death. She felt the pull of it, the old reflex to solve, to anticipate, to become the sharp edge again. And she hated how natural it felt. "Use your men, Colonel," she said softly. "They're good soldiers." "They are," he admitted, "but they're not you." His words hung between them, heavy, dangerous. She turned, leaving him to his maps, his command, his war. Outside, the sunlight burned bright. The dust clung to everything. The wind carried secrets through the valley. She walked back toward the perimeter, her fist still tight around the spent casing in her pocket. A reminder, a curse, a truth she couldn't escape. She had thought she was invisible, forgotten, left behind. But the ghost of Spectre was awake again. And ghosts never go back to sleep. Why couldn't they just leave it alone? The outpost had returned to its routine, or pretended to. Patrols rotated. Weapons were cleaned. Radios crackled with check-ins. But beneath the rhythm, a current ran. Every ranger on the fob carried it now, the memory of 2 shots that had rewritten the rules. When Ara walked past, conversation stuttered. Eyes followed. Not mockery this time, but something sharper, curiosity, deference, even awe. She didn't want it. Respect was another kind of prison. It wrapped around her like barbed wire, pressing her back into a shape she had sworn she wouldn't wear again. Every nod she received, Every cautious "ma'am" that replaced the muttered jokes was another reminder that they no longer saw her as invisible. She had become something else, something dangerous, and she could feel the weight of it pressing against her chest. That evening she lingered on the berm again, staring into the mountains. The dragon's tooth was just a shadow now, its secret shattered. But the mountains were never empty for long. She knew that. The enemy would adapt. They always did. She pulled the casing from her pocket again, rolling it between her fingers. The brass glinted faintly in the fading light, the edges worn smooth by her palm. She hated that she couldn't let it go, hated that she needed to hold on. Behind her, laughter rose from the chow hall, forced and brittle. She wondered if any of them truly believed the danger was over, or if they were simply trying to convince themselves. She didn't believe it. And when the next crackle came across the radios, her doubt was proven right. The lieutenant in the command tent called for Thorne with urgency that cut through the base. A fresh drone feed, another ridge, another silhouette where none should be. Not a relay this time, but something worse, an emplacement dug into the rock, angled to sweep across the supply route that fed Bastion. Heavy weapon, crew served. A threat not of surveillance, but of fire. The colonel's voice rose sharp and furious, but beneath it was something else now. Not just anger, unease. He had seen the impossible undone once, and now he had to face it again. The Rangers moved fast. Hassan's platoon assembled, grim and professional. Plans spun across maps, theories of approach, of neutralization. But the terrain mocked them again, sheer cliffs, razor ridges, exposure at every angle. No clean shot, no safe path, no easy answer. Ara listened from the edges. She didn't speak. Not yet, she just watched, the same way she had before. Her stomach tightened as the memories pressed closer. How many times had she been here before? How many times had she seen men circle a problem, their pride blinding them to the reality that the math couldn't be bent to willpower? She had sworn she wouldn't step in again, sworn she would let them be soldiers without her shadow falling across their work. But she already knew how this would end. Hassan's voice cut through the radio chatter, frustration bleeding at the edges. "Sir, we can't close the distance without losing men. That ridge is a kill zone." Thorne's reply came back ragged. "We don't have the luxury of waiting. That gun locks in and will bleed convoys for weeks." The silence that followed was heavy, a silence Ara knew too well, the kind that came before someone asked the unthinkable. She walked away before it could come. Away from the chow hall, the radios, the voices. She moved to the far edge of the compound where the floodlights barely reached. The mountains loomed there, jagged against the stars, watching her with the patience of stone. Her chest rose and fell in slow, heavy breaths. She pressed her thumb into the casing in her pocket until it left an imprint in her skin. Not me, she told herself, not again. But the ghosts whispered otherwise. They whispered of the boy soldier in the wrong place at the wrong time. They whispered of the villagers who starved when the depot burned. They whispered of the faces she had aimed at, the faces she had erased. Every legend they spoke about her was built on silence, and every silence weighed her down. Behind her, boots scraped gravel. She turned slightly, not surprised to see Hassan there. "You're walking the perimeter again," he said, not a question. "Habit," she replied. He studied her, the lines of his face taut in the dim light. "The colonel's losing patience. We can't find an answer to that ridge." She didn't respond. After a moment he added, "He'll come to you, you know that, right?" She closed her eyes, the words slicing deeper than he realized. "And if he does?" Hassan hesitated, then spoke with the brutal honesty of a soldier. "Then you'll do what you did yesterday. You'll solve it, because that's who you are." She looked at him then, hard, her voice low. "You think that's a gift, but it is. It's a weight. Every time I pick up a rifle, I leave something behind, and I never get it back." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He wasn't a man who dealt in poetry, he dealt in survival. Sometimes wait is what saves the rest of us. He left her with that, walking back into the glow of the fob. She stood alone, the valley stretching before her, black and endless. And she hated that he was right. By morning, the colonel did come. He didn't bark orders. He didn't sneer. He simply stepped into her path as she returned from her dawn walk, his expression hard but stripped of arrogance. "Master Sergeant," he said, "I need your eyes on this." She looked past him, toward the map he carried under his arm, toward the mountains that had become her canvas again. Her lips parted as if to refuse. The word no balanced there, fragile, but it never left her mouth. Because deep down, she knew what was coming. The enemy was adapting, the valley was shifting. And the ghost they called Spectre was being called back into the light. How many times had she promised herself never to stand over a map again? The morning light cut sharp through the canvas walls of the command tent, painting pale lines across the table where the colonel had spread his map. Ridge lines, valleys, elevation marks, they sprawled across the paper like veins, each line pulsing with risk. Around the table stood Hassan, Davies, 2 lieutenants, and Ara. She hadn't agreed to this, not really. She had simply followed when Thorne asked, silent as ever. But here she was, hands loose at her sides, eyes pulled to the paper against her will. The colonel tapped the spot. Here, ridge north of the Dragon's Tooth, enemy emplacement, crew-served weapon, overwatch on the convoy route. The younger lieutenant shifted uneasily. "Sir, any approach from the west is exposed. They'll cut us apart before we can close." "East," Thorne demanded. "Worse," Hassan said, his voice steady but grim. "Cliffs are sheer, no cover, no angle." Thorne's jaw worked, teeth grinding. "We need that gun silenced." The silence that followed was familiar, a silence that expected her to break it. She resisted, for a heartbeat. 2. She wanted to let it pass, to let them solve it, to walk out and pretend she hadn't seen the lines of death laid bare on that paper. But her eyes betrayed her. She saw the valley not as ink but as ground, saw the wind currents funneling between peaks, the updrafts curling at midday, the cold air dropping from snowmelt. She saw angles of fire, not just of their weapon but of hers. The words left her mouth before she could stop them. "Here," she said quietly, touching the map with one finger, "a bluff south of the ridge, half hidden by jagged outcroppings. From here you'd have line of sight, concealment until the last 100 yards." The room stilled. The lieutenant frowned. "That's a 2-mile climb, the angle's brutal, it'd take hours." "Not a team," she said. "A single shot, one rifle, one chance." The silence thickened. Hassan's eyes flicked toward her, the weight of memory in them. He had seen her do it once already. He knew what she was suggesting. Thorne's gaze locked on her, sharp and heavy. "You're saying you can make that shot?" Her chest tightened. She wanted to deny it, wanted to tell him no, but she couldn't lie, not about this. "Yes." The word felt like a chain snapping shut. Thorne exhaled slowly, the decision written in his face before he spoke. "Then that's the plan." She looked away, because even as the room shifted, even as men who had doubted her now leaned into belief, she felt the old sickness rising, the sickness of being needed. The briefing dissolved into movement. Hassan pulled Davies aside, talking ballistics, atmospherics. The colonel gave clipped orders to the lieutenants. The fob hummed with the energy of a mission sharpening into focus. And Ara stepped back from the table, slipping out into the sunlight before the weight of their eyes crushed her. Outside, the valley stretched wide and merciless. She walked toward the perimeter again, boots crunching, breath heavy. She didn't want this. Every step back into that world was another brick on her chest. She had left for a reason. She had buried Spectre for a reason. The name was poison, no matter how respectfully they whispered it now. She stopped near the northern berm, staring out at the ridges. Somewhere up there, the enemy was digging in, laughing at the thought of rangers scrambling helplessly below. Somewhere up there, another problem was waiting for her bullet. She pulled the casing from her pocket again, turning it in her hand until the brass pressed into her skin. The reminder, the warning. "Master Sergeant." She turned. Tanaka stood a few feet away, nervous as ever. He looked like a boy standing before a storm. "Yes." He hesitated, then blurted it. "Is it true that you were your Spectre?" Her stomach nodded. "Who told you that?" she asked. "Rumors. After yesterday, the guys, they talk. They're saying you're the one from the stories, the long shots, the impossible missions." His voice was almost reverent. She looked at him, really looked at him. He was young, too young to carry myths as truth. She thought of the faces she had erased, the collateral buried under those stories. Myths were clean, reality was not. "Rumors are just that," she said flatly. He flushed, embarrassed. "I didn't mean." She softened just slightly. "You want to know the truth, specialist. The truth is, legends are written by men who weren't there. What you call impossible shots were just problems with consequences, and the consequences don't go away. Not ever." He swallowed, eyes wide, and nodded. She turned away, letting him retreat into silence. By evening, preparations were complete. Hassan's team checked and rechecked their kit. The colonel hovered near the radio tent, barking updates, his impatience sharper than ever. And Ara. She sat in the armory again, cleaning a rifle that wasn't hers but felt like it. The motions were automatic, each stroke of the cloth, each click of the bolt, as familiar as breathing. Her hands remembered even when her mind wanted to forget. She could hear the murmurs outside. The rangers knew. They didn't say it aloud, but they knew. She had become the plan. And it scared her more than the enemy, Ridge, ever could. Because once you became the plan, you stopped being invisible. You stopped being forgotten. You became the weight everyone else leaned on. And she knew too well how heavy that weight could be. When the sun dipped behind the peaks and the valley turned to shadow, she stepped outside. Hassan was waiting, Davies at his side. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The mission was already set. She looked at them both, saw the respect in their eyes, the belief. It was almost worse than dismissal. Dismissal freed her. Belief bound her. "Tomorrow," Hassan said simply. She nodded once. Then she walked back toward her tent, the brass casing still in her palm, the ghost of Spectre whispering at her shoulder. Why did the air always taste like finality before a mission? The valley was still dark when Ara rose. The fob buzzed in a hushed rhythm, men moving like shadows, gear clinking softly in the pre-dawn cold. She dressed without ceremony, the motions mechanical, her hands steady even as her chest carried the weight of inevitability. Hassan met her near the armory. He didn't waste words. He simply handed her the rifle, already checked, already spotless, the scope polished to clarity. She nodded once. He returned the gesture. Between them, words weren't necessary anymore. The climb began as the horizon bruised from black to gray. Three of them, Hassan, Davies, and Ara, slipped out past the wire, their boots silent against the rocks. No chatter, no radio calls, just breath and stone and the endless upward pull of the ridge. The air thinned as they ascended, each step heavier than the last. Hassan carried the pack with spare ammo, Davies lugged the spotter's gear, Ara bore only the rifle across her chest, its weight familiar, almost comforting. But in her head the voices churned. Why am I here again? Why did I let them pull me back into this? Each switchback whispered memories, faces, the men she had trained who hadn't come home, the innocents lost in the shadows of missions no one spoke of. The name Spectre burned like a brand against her ribs. Halfway up they paused to drink, lungs burning, sweat cutting cold across their backs. Hassan glanced at her. She looked steady, unbothered. He didn't know that every breath carried ghosts. By the time they reached the bluff she had marked on the map, the sun was clawing its way over the peaks, bleeding gold light across the valley. They dropped packs, moved low, scanned the ridge opposite. And there it was. The emplacement, dug into stone, camouflaged with tarps and brush. The glint of steel barrels, a nest of death waiting to pour fire onto the supply route below. Davies muttered a curse, pulling up the spotter's scope. Range 2,900, wind swirling bad. He shook his head. This is suicide. Hassan shot him a look, sharp enough to silence further protest. Then both men turned to her. She lay prone, settling into the dust, the rifle sliding into her shoulder like it belonged there. The world narrowed. The target shimmered across the valley, taunting her with distance, with physics, with the arrogant certainty of men who thought no one could touch them here. She didn't touch the trigger yet. Instead, she closed her eyes. And for a long breath, she wasn't on this ridge. She was everywhere else. Iraq, Syria, the Horn of Africa, places she had sworn she would leave behind. Each shot she had taken, each problem she had solved, each silence she had earned. And the cost of every one. Her hand tightened around the stock. You shouldn't be here. But she was. Her eyes opened. The scope filled her vision. The calculations began. Davies rattled numbers, temperature, pressure, humidity. She listened, absorbed, but didn't need them. The valley spoke to her in ways no chart could. The wind traced its fingers across her cheek, whispered its secrets in the shimmer of mirage. She mapped it layer by layer. Ground current, light left to right. Mid-valley, unpredictable shear, gusting hard. Upper channel, soft right to left, steady. A puzzle of moving air, each piece conspiring to deflect her round. She breathed slow, felt her pulse, let the math bloom in her mind like muscle memory. Elevation 39 mils, she said softly. Windage 43 left. Davies hesitated. Ma'am, that's... Trust it, she cut in. He shut his mouth. Hassan crouched nearby, his eyes on her. No disbelief this time, just quiet, hard faith. She shifted her aim, not at the gun itself, but at the crew working it. Men bent over their weapons, secure in the illusion of safety. She chose the one giving orders, the one whose gestures carried command. The leader, always the leader first. Her breath slowed, the valley hushed, even the wind seemed to hold still for her. Inhale, hold, exhale. The shot broke. The crack rolled across the ridge, echoing into silence. Through the scope, she watched the round carve its impossible arc, twisting through invisible currents, fighting gravity. Seconds stretched. Then the man dropped, a clean bloom of red against rock. The nest erupted. Shouts, scrambling, men diving for cover. Hands grabbing at the gun, trying to swing it into position, panic breaking their discipline. She cycled the bolt, chambering another round. Calm, steady, already recalculating. Second shot, the gunner. She aimed not at his chest, but at the narrow strip of exposed temple between helmet and cheek guard. Smaller than a coin, 3,000 yards away. Breath beat, silence. Crack. The bullet found him. His body slumped over the weapon, dead weight dragging the barrel uselessly downward. Davies exhaled a sound somewhere between awe and disbelief. Hassan didn't move, didn't speak. The emplacement was chaos now. Men shouting, some firing wildly into the valley, bullets sparking against stone nowhere near their position. They had no idea where death was coming from, only that it was coming. She chambered a third round, aimed not at flesh but at steel, the feed mechanism of the gun, a precise weakness. Breath, crack, impact. The weapon jammed, smoke rising, crew scattering in panic. 3 shots, 3 answers, the problem was solved. But Ara didn't lift her head from the scope. Her cheek pressed hard into the stock, her eye unblinking, because solving problems was easy, living with them was not. She stayed there, staring across the valley at the ruin she had created. Men dragging bodies, others retreating into the rocks, a machine silenced. The valley was quiet again, but inside her the ghost screamed. Hassan finally spoke, his voice low. Target neutralized, clean work. She didn't respond. Davies whispered almost to himself, "She's not human." But Ara heard it, and it cut, because she was human, too human. Every shot cost her something, and today the cost was rising again. She pushed herself up slowly, the rifle heavy in her hands, heavier than it had ever been. Hassan offered a hand to help her to her feet. She ignored it, standing on her own. They packed in silence. The descent was harder than the climb, knees screaming, lungs burning, the sun a hammer overhead. They returned to the fob exhausted, their silence thicker than any after-action report. When they reached the wire, the rangers waiting there stood straighter. Their eyes burned with respect, with belief, with awe. She walked past them without a word, without a glance. Back to her tent, back to her casing, back to the silence she couldn't escape. Because every time she fired, she wasn't just Spectre to them. She was Spectre to herself again. And that was the heaviest weight of all. How long could a ghost keep pretending to be alive? The days after the ridge blurred together. The fob ran on its usual rhythm, convoys, patrols, drills, but beneath the surface, everything had shifted. Men who once dismissed her now looked up when she passed. Their eyes followed not with mockery but with recognition. It was worse than laughter. Respect was weight. It pressed against her like armor she hadn't chosen. She had wanted invisibility, to walk through this place unseen, unneeded. Instead, she was the center of gravity now. At Chow, men hushed when she entered. When she walked the perimeter, young soldiers trailed her with their eyes, whispering about impossible distances, perfect shots. In the barracks, they traded stories like children telling ghost tales. Spectre. The name spread through the company like fire through dry grass. Spoken quietly at first, then louder, bolder, until it clung to every corner of the fob. She hated it. Because they didn't know. They only saw clean hits, impossible math solved with calm precision. They didn't see the ghosts that came with every trigger pull. They didn't hear the echoes of decisions made in silence, the collateral carved into her memory. They didn't understand that each perfect shot was bought with something she could never get back. But that was the truth of legends. The myth was clean. The person inside it was not. The colonel called her in one evening. The tent was dim, lanterns casting sharp shadows across the map table. Thorne stood stiff, his hands clasped behind his back, his face carved with something more than authority. Respect, maybe even humility. "Master Sergeant," he said. She didn't answer. She just looked at him, waiting. "I don't think I've ever been more wrong about someone," he admitted. His voice was quiet, stripped bare. "I dismissed you, treated you like a burden, and you've saved more lives in this valley than I can count." She said nothing. He took a breath. "I can't undo how I treated you, but I can tell you this. You've reminded me that this uniform, this rank, it doesn't make me infallible. Respect is earned, and you earned it with every man who watched you work." He paused, then added, "including me." Her eyes softened, but only slightly. "Colonel," she said, her voice quiet, "don't put me on a pedestal. Pedestals are just higher places to fall from." For a moment, silence hung between them. Then he nodded, as if accepting a lesson he hadn't expected to learn. When she stepped back into the night, the air was cool, the stars sharp. She walked to the perimeter again, the same place she always ended up. The valley stretched endless before her, the ridges black against the horizon. She pulled the casing from her pocket. Now worn smooth, its shine dulled by the constant rub of her thumb. It wasn't a trophy. It wasn't proof. It was a reminder that every problem solved left a scar, and every scar carried weight. Footsteps approached. She didn't turn, she knew who it was. Tanaka. He stood beside her awkwardly, shifting from foot to foot, then finally spoke. "I wanted to say I'm sorry for before, for not seeing you." She didn't look at him. Most people don't. He nodded, swallowing hard. "The guys, they talk about you like you're not real, like you're something else. But I think I think you're just a soldier who never quit." That made her look at him, his young face earnest, uncertain. "Don't make me into more than I am," she said softly. "I'm not a ghost story. I'm just someone who did her job, and the job takes pieces of you. Don't forget that." His throat bobbed as he nodded. He didn't argue. After he left, she stayed. Alone again with the valley, with the casing in her palm, with the silence that stretched forever. The fob carried on around her, boots on gravel, laughter in the chow hall, radios crackling with distant voices. Life continued as it always did, but for Ara time had slowed. She thought of the name Spectre, how it had been given to her like a crown and a chain, how it had followed her into every mission, every briefing, every whispered story. And now here it had found her again. She had tried to bury it, tried to become invisible, but ghosts don't stay buried. The truth was simple. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't a myth. She wasn't even a soldier anymore. She was just a woman who had learned to solve problems no one else could. A woman who carried the silence of every consequence. The valley wind brushed her cheek, soft now, no longer an adversary. She closed her eyes and let it pass over her. And for the first time since she had fired, she let the rifle go in her mind. Let it rest. Because dignity doesn't shout, dignity doesn't demand. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts.